Hey, good morning. It's Nicole St. Aubin with Realty Masters. We've had a lot of our landlords decide to sell their property now that the market is improving and will continue to improve. I wanted to talk to you today about best practices for selling your rental property. The first piece of advice we have for you is to approach your tenants first. You may have a ready, willing, and able buyer already living in your property. Just this week, we closed on an owner's property on Pitcher Plant. The tenant had been there for 2 years. We called the tenant, letting them know that the owner was considering putting the property on the market for sale, and they made us an offer before we even listed it. Obviously, this saves a lot of time, energy, and effort, and is a reduced commission offered by our agency when your tenant buys the property. Number 2 would be to consider putting your property on the market for sale or for rent. If you're not sold on the idea of selling your property, it is a good idea to market them both at the same time. We're able to put your property on the rental market when your tenants give lease notice to vacate, as well as the sales market. Now keep in mind, it takes an average of 30 days to rent your property, and the average time on the market for sales in Pensacola is about 90 days. So it's not likely that your property will sell before it rents. Sometimes our owners decide to put the property on the market for sale for 30 days to give that some time and traction. And if we're not getting the activity that we need when your tenants vacate, we can go ahead and put it on the rental market. Number 3 is to review your lease agreement. What does your lease agreement say about selling your property? Is there a clause in there that allows the tenant to vacate if the property is sold? Now, our lease agreement, which is of course not standard, it does allow a 60 days termination clause, and that says if your property goes under contract, we can give your tenants a 60 days notice to vacate. Some owners think that if the property is sold, that automatically terminates their lease. Florida landlord tenant law does state that if you sell your property, the lease does not cancel upon the sale, and you will have to keep the tenant in place unless there's an additional agreement in your lease. Number 4, along the lines of lease, consider the lease expiration date. We've had owners that re-rented the property and then 2 months later decided to sell the property. That is never going to be a successful scenario for you. So your tenants just spent money on a security deposit, on moving expenses, paying rent. Moving is hard. They will hate you. They will be very upset with you, and they're not going to help you sell your property. If you look at the interest, your goal being to sell the property, their goal being to stay in the property and not having to move again after 2 months. We never recommend renting your property and then listing it for sale immediately following that. In fact, within the first 6 months of your tenant's lease agreement, we have found if you list the property in this time that you will have an unsuccessful situation. A lot of times the tenants try to break their lease agreement, and as soon as you put the property on the market for sale, if it doesn't sell, then you have a vacancy, and of course the tenant is not going to leave the property good for you because they're upset that they're having to move. We typically find the sweet spot for putting your property on the market for sale is about 3 months prior to the expiration of your lease agreement. Now, of course, spring and summer are better times to list your property, and they do in fact sell faster in those time frames. So of course, we want to consider timeliness in the market. But you've got to consider the tenant and your property. If your property is tenant occupied, the tenants are going to be very instrumental in selling the property. And if you do not work with them, it's going to be an unsuccessful situation. If you do have a tenant in place and you want to put the property up for sale, it's best to have a plan of action. Go ahead and plan out a timeline and communicate that timeline to your tenants. For instance, if the property is placed on the market 4 months prior to the tenant's lease expiration and they have indicated that they want to stay if the property doesn't sell, you can give it a good 60 to 90 days, the average time on the market, to see if the property will sell, and then let the tenants know if it does not sell within 60 to 90 days that you will pull it off the sales market and renew the tenant's lease again. Number 6 is to consider an incentive to the tenant. You know, if you've ever sold a property, how hard it is to cooperate with showings. A lot of realtors do not have 24 hours notice. Their clients come into town and they want to see a property today. Florida landlord tenant law states that we have to give your tenants next day notice for showing. You can't just show up with an hour or two's notice. That is against the law, and your tenants will not allow for that. Consider the expenses of moving and how hard it is to move, the energy required to do so. It's best to incentivize your tenants. We've seen owners who have offered a reduced monthly rental rate. We've seen owners that have offered the full security deposit back when the tenants vacate, or even a month's rent for free. Having them be a stakeholder in the sale will make for a more successful sale. They're going to be more likely to cooperate with showings, especially those with less than next day notice. They're going to keep your house show ready, which is one of the hardest parts of having your property on the market, is having it ready for people to tour at any given time. And it doesn't have to be a large incentive, just something to say, hey, we know what you're going through, we appreciate your efforts, and we thank you for helping us achieve our goals. The last best practice for selling your rental property would be to know that your property is going to need some sprucing up to be competitive. You've had a tenant in there for 4, 5, 10 years. They don't pressure wash, they don't weave the beds like they should. The tenants are taking care of the interior of the property, but not necessarily at the rate that you would. Consider if you were living in the property every couple of years, you're going to paint, you're going to update fixtures or do some cosmetic updates. If you've not done these, then you need to do these. Prior to listing your home on the market, we do recommend going in, doing an evaluation, and then making some cost-effective ways that you can improve your property to be competitive to the other owner-occupied properties. Another idea is to go forward with a professional home inspector to come evaluate your property and point out the items that will stop an FHA or VA buyer from being able to purchase your home, such as wood rot, fogged windows, some of these items that are not necessarily brought to your attention or fixed right away. It's better to know ahead of time what issues will come up on a home inspection. Recently we've had a problem with roof life being 5 years or under and getting financing as well as insurance. Some of these problems are huge and major deal breakers and could prevent your property from selling to anyone unless it's a cash buyer. So of course that would reduce your sales price. Having the property spruced up and some cosmetic upgrades done prior to putting it on the market for sale is going to pay you back in dividends at your sales price. We're happy to answer any questions that you have about selling your tenant-occupied properties. Reach out to your property manager or our sales team with your questions, and we will be happy to provide a market analysis. We know a lot of you were hesitant landlords, were forced into being a landlord and didn't purchase your property with the intentions of being a landlord. You just could not sell when the time came for you to relocate. We understand that, and we are seeing a lot of those types of landlords making the move to put the property on the sales market. We're happy to cooperate with that and help you achieve your goals. Thank you so much.